Click record. Okay. All right. There's really no need for introduction for me. You guys know me. I'm the executive director here at the St. Charles Center for Faith and Action. We create spaces for people of all faiths to learn, unlearn, and act. And learning over lunch is just one way we want to create space to stay curious and connected. So today's conversation is especially timely. Many of us know how quickly discussions about religion or deeply held beliefs can become tense or exhausting. So we wanted to offer something practical, a tool for engagement about these conversations and how to have them with more clarity, context, and confidence. So I'm honored to welcome Dr. Bob Miner. Dr. Miner is Professor Emeritus of Religious Studies at the University of Kansas, author of several influential books on religion, identity, and human dignity, and a longtime educator and activist in the field of human rights. He has led workshops across the country, including many with PFLAG National, which is how we connected, and has been helping people navigate conversations on faith, gender, sexuality, racism, and healthy activism. He brings deep experience, compassion, and a little bit of humor to this work, and I think you guys will feel that and see that right away. Dr. Miner, thank you so much for being with us today. We're excited to learn alongside you, and to everyone joining, feel free to eat, keep your camera on or off, either way, it doesn't matter. And we'll have time for Q&A at the end. All right, Dr. Miner, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Paige. So are you pinning me or something like that, or how spotlighting? I don't know what the issue. Anyway, and everybody can see. I'm going to use a PowerPoint, which, as Paige knows, is when I'm one-on-one with people or in a meeting, I don't use PowerPoint. But in this kind of setting, I think it will work, and so on. And you've already received a PDF of the booklet that's down there in the right-hand corner when you're having a religious argument. And in a sense, that's the PowerPoint. It's in a different order, but you'd have everything in there that if you wanted to look back at this stuff, you'd have it. So there's no worry about, did I get everything I needed to get? You will have it there. So we can all relax and go after this, and I'm going to get started. Again, thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to do this. The Fairness Project is a project, not another organization you joined. It's meant to be there to help other organizations as best we can, providing a speaker, providing these booklets and so on that have gone out of the country. This one is one of 5 in a series of booklets. I don't know, did you get one of these, Paige, at the other one? Did you get that at the other one? This one is the most recent revision. This is the 4th edition on responding to psychological arguments about LGBTQ people. There's even one in the series on how to prevent activist burnout, blowout, and breaking up, the things that happen to any organization, particularly when it's doing its own, when it's doing well. It's sociologically predictable. How to help us do that. So anyway, that's what that's for. And it's meant to be practical. And this is meant to be practical. So let me get going with it. And I hope, again, you'll take out of it what you need, what works for you. Let go of anything that you don't think works for you, and you'll make it your own. You don't need to quote me. You don't need to do anything. Just do how it works and make it your own. And that's the important thing, and so on. So let's get started. And that's my information. And it's also on the booklet you'll have, the PDF you have, and so on. If you need to get in contact with me or something like that, this is how to do it. So let's get started. I think we should begin with the concept that we need to be aware of what we're doing. And I realize that I'm talking to people who have a lot of experience in this. So, and your total experience is much more than mine. So I may be going over some things you already know, but I want to. So one of the things I'm talking about is I'm not talking about with dealing with the movable middle. And there's good and bad news about that. The middle is shrinking. The good news is there are people who are moving to a progressive side of that, and there are people who are moving to the other side of it. So it's not shrinking all in our favor. And that's the deal about it. Um, let's see. So I want to kind of start by just what are the signs I think that someone is stuck. And I've written about this in a book called When Religion is an Addiction. I'm not here to sell books. Um, uh, because I think the key, and a lot of times, and I'll go into this a little bit, is we're not arguing about religion. We're arguing about how people use religion. Because the same Bible, the same text, the same things can be used by Martin Luther King Jr., or they can be used by Jerry Falwell, if I'm an old non-friend. So I realize there's a distinction between addictive and non-addictive religious use. And so I want to know why these people are stuck. So let's look at I think, some signs that someone is stuck in this kind of thing. And first of all, it's the persistent use of well-worn talking points. Religious language is often used by these people to stop discussion, not to continue discussion. And you do that with words like, well, are you not a follower of God? Stuff like that. That's a common thing, and that's one of the common signs of this. Also, when you're in a discussion, you find they don't respond to your responses. They change the subject. They reuse even more typical talking points, and it just goes on and on and on. So it begins to get in a cycle. And you recognize this. This is going on. This isn't someone who just wants to learn. They're not asking the questions you ask of them. They'll go into something else. Well, what aboutism and so on like that. If they wanted to learn, they could. There are all sorts of resources. I have some in the back of that booklet. I'm going to mention some more as we go along here and so on for that. Another one is they quote one authority after another. And that authority could be the Bible. Well, what about this? Well, what about Romans 1? Well, what about this? Well, what about that? What about this? Or something they think is from the Bible. I'll never forget being when I was in graduate school, we guys who are studying religion will kind of go around to church meetings, and we weren't treating them these were pretty conservative ones, and we weren't treating them very respectfully, though we were respectful there. And I remember being in a Bible study or a midweek prayer service, and there was this woman who everybody said was a prayer warrior, and she was praying, "As thou hast said, where there's a will, there's a way." Now, thou didn't say that unless thou was Ben Franklin in Poor Richard's Almanac, but she was sure it was there. So you know how that is. They'll quote these things as if something's there that isn't even there, and that's a mark of this. And then the inability to think of the issue in terms of the lives of the human beings that are affected, rather than just generalizations, let's say, about LGBTQI people, about immigrants, about you name it. This can apply to anything, though my work is mostly dealing with LGBTQI discrimination and the cliches and the stereotypes. So you begin to say, what's going on? And this is why we ask this question. How can they be so cruel? Well, this is a protective mechanism that's a part of that. And then they actually start to get energized from this thing, get angry, sarcastic, put downs. They're even unaware of themselves by the argument. That's another side that they'll do this. And so I'll talk a little bit, some examples or two of that, but that's another sign. Let's see. Okay. So I always look at things in terms of how I can grow in this experience, as well as the outward activism. And so I think we use these experiences, and sometimes we find out how we get hung up about religious claims ourselves. And this is because of our own backgrounds. Everybody in this culture has been hurt by religion, whether they're religious or not, whether they've been able to escape it, whether they're recovering fundamentals, whatever it is, it's still there. And so when we get triggered, when we get angry, when we get upset by these discussions, That means that's a good sign, first of all, that we need to do our own personal work. Okay, so that's uh, that's an important piece of this as well. Um, Everyone in this culture then has experienced some religious abuse. You only needed to have a television set in the old days, or radio, or even watch CNN or whatever, because it's so much of the time the argument when it relates to religion is something versus some right-wing extremists representing Christianity. You know how that is. And the media likes that because that provides the show for them, and they want people to watch it. Um, we need to recognize then for ourselves, admit and face, and this is ongoing, as you know, this is healing. My view is always a healing. My approach to everything is a healing model, not a war model, not any other model, and so on. So we need to recognize, admit, and face, and heal our own relationships to past experiences. And you all are in some way related to religion. If you're here, you're relating to it, I think, in a positive way. But still, we can know what triggers us. And so every experience, when we get triggered, when we catch ourselves being triggered, aha, I react in anger rather than this being a learning experience. That tells me something that I need to work on for myself, however I do that. So we use every argument, every discussion as a chance for our own growth. And this is how we sort of have to think about this. We're not stuck. We're not gonna do it perfectly. Promise me you won't do this perfectly. If you've been doing it perfectly all this time, my advice is stop it and throw in a mistake, plan in a mistake every so often, because our culture doesn't need models of perfect people. It needs models of people who make mistakes and know how to clean them up. And we're not very good at that, this culture. We even have ways to say, I'm sorry if that hurt you, which means not only did it hurt you, but you're obviously a ninny because it did. And this is, so every argument is a chance for our slow something. And that means we need to forgive ourselves, you know, and so on. Another thing we need to know is that all claims made about religion are relative to the person who makes them. They're not about religion in general, or they're not about one of the religions. They're not about Christianity. They're not about Buddhism. They're not about Islam. They're about the persons making them. I'm hoping that makes sense. And we can, if you have questions or disagreements, a lot of people in the world would disagree with me. So you'd be in a big group. But we can talk about that, and feel free to talk openly about that. Okay. So we realize that the claims they're making about religion are relative to the person who makes them, not about religion in general, or Buddhism has always, or Christianity has always. No, they've all got a history. I'm a historian of religion. I know the history of this, ups and downs of everything. So we're not dealing with the isms. We're dealing with the person in front of us. Okay. And know that there are no new arguments to be made about any of these issues. Everything that's been said has been said before. Okay, so we're not dealing with anything new. And every argument, again, I deal mostly with LGBTQ things, so that's where I'm looking. But you can apply this broadly. Every argument that's being made has been answered by scholars, at least for over half a century. And when I'm dealing with LGBTQI issues, that means anything you hear on these issues are old and been answered by scholars. And every religious ism has taken various positions regarding, again, LGBTQI issues down through history. And each time they took that position, they thought it was the true and final one. And so an important principle to realize, and this is what progressive religion is fighting, is that the dominant religious position in every society reflects and sanctifies that society's current prejudices. So I will, when I'm talking to groups on things, I don't argue religion, but I'll say as a historian, for example, on these LGBT issues, I know that all the passages that are used against LGBTQI people, and this could be said about immigrants, this could be said about anything, I know that all of them have many different interpretations. And my question is, why this one most popular interpretation is the most popular? And it's because it reflects the society's prejudice, right? So, an example, I hope I'll give it now. In 1889, 1849, the Southern Baptist Convention split. If you're Baptist, you know this, or should, split from the Northern Baptist Convention over the support of slavery. Okay, 1849. And when that happened, frankly, up to that time, the traditional interpretation of the Bible was pro-slavery. So here these abolitionists come along and say, there are other ways to understand this book. And so the preachers who stood on the side of the status quo said, you're just being modernists and interpreting, and we're the ones who are taking it literally, right? And the people on the other side, who were this, what I call the status quo, they were saying, no, this is how it should be understood, right? But no surprise, the dominant religious position was the one that supported the economic structure at the time. It supported everything. And that's true of every society, of every religion. So these isms change. Buddhism in Japan is not the same as Buddhism in Thailand. It's very different. It's picked up all kinds of cultural things and so on. Everyone, Islam is the same. In India, it's different than where it is in Saudi Arabia. Christianity in America has been different than it in Europe. One famous church historian, Sidney Mead, who's passed away by now, said, America is the marketplace of souls. And so there's this need to count souls and count butts in the pews, as they say, to, to define how well you're doing. And that's a very good commercial capitalist way of understanding. We'd expect that, you know. So that's an important piece we want to know. Another thing we want to ask when we get into an argument like this is, why is this argument important to me? Is this encounter worth my time, or can my energy be better spent with others? I think that's a legitimate question to ask. Is this worth my energy? Should it be put to use to other people in effective activist work? Has it turned into an argument I need to win? Why? If I lose, have I done something wrong? Have I come to feel that the whole movement will fail if I choose to walk away from this one? And notice the pressure that puts on someone, that idea that will keep them from being creative and present in the moment. Oh no. So we need to reject the guilt, because it will not. The movement will not depend on this one encounter. But we've got to make sure we don't buy into that, or we will not be able to respond creatively, actively, present in the present to what's going on. Now, the key is, as I said, stuck people often use religion as an addiction. People's real issues for their religion are deeper and highly emotional. And they often use religion in order not to face their real issues. So religion and its scriptures, its traditions, its institutions get blamed instead of facing these personal issues. My example of this kind of thing as an addictive way of doing things is that many people who are stuck in religion like this, and I don't mean people who are religious. I mean those who can't, who can't use religion in a positive way, as liberating, as emotionally improving, as dealing with their issues. So instead of dealing with their issues, this is what they do. They quote God and everything. I wouldn't be against gay people, but God's against gay people. So I have to be against gay people. You see, it's not my fault. It's not my prejudice. It's God's fault. You see that? It's like saying the liquor made me do it. See? And that's what's going on as they use these things. And I think that's an important dynamic for us to see, as we'll talk about. So religion, people often use religion in order not to face their real issues. A non-recovering alcoholic will love to argue with you whether tequila or vodka is better for you, because that doesn't affect at all or get attached at all to why they are an alcoholic, right? And so they don't want to argue that. That's too personal. So we need to watch that. And so they get blamed instead of facing personal issues. That's religion as an addiction. I would say something is traditional, but traditional means picking and choosing from all of history whatever someone wants to be the norm and leaving most things out, right? Bigotry is traditional. I will admit that. You see, cockroaches have existed in what we called homes since the dinosaurs. And nobody is arguing that, therefore, traditional family values should support cockroaches. So you pick out of history what you want and leave out most of it and call it traditional. Traditional family values is an old saying, and it means white 1950s families. And they are very white. They are not the dysfunctional families that people of color are being accused of having. And that went with all of the studies that were done by conservatives back then about how Black families were failing and so on. It didn't matter that the studies actually showed that Black families spent more time doing homework with their kids than white families did. It didn't matter, you see, because traditional family values were about a white picture of a white family. So arguments using the Bible or any holy writings always involve interpretation. And we've got to do that. One of the books that I read recently was a book called Homosexuality in Islam. And it is so thick, so scholarly, so readable, and he means also transgender people too, that and so anti what fundamentalist Muslims think is true. It's more historical. And so it's one that has come out since it's not in the booklet you have. The next version of it will have it. Here is still the best book on this question. This is in your bibliography in that booklet. What the Bible says.
Real quick, Dr. Miner, and say, for some reason it like blends in with your background, the book's
Okay.
but in the small window, if everybody can look in the small window, you can see the title of the book still pop up. It shows on that little video.
It's there.
Yeah.
You can see it. Okay. Sorry. It's what the Bible says. This is in the booklet. In the back of the booklet they have. This one's listed by Daniel Helminian. This is the second edition. It's from the year 2000. There is nothing new about it since then. And I keep up on that stuff. So, um, arguments using the Bible are always involve interpretation. And I'll talk about how that affects us. There are no literalists. People take literally what they want and they interpret what they don't want. No one takes literally the Psalms when they say the mountains rise up and clap their hands for joy. No one is arguing that that's about geology. And even, I mean, there's so many other examples of that. Anyway, so arguments using the Bible or anyone writing always involve interpretation. We have to realize that arguing the Bible, tradition, or institutional stands then can enforce the addiction, as I said. It's a form of enabling because it keeps the user from having to deal with their own issues. Like I said, it's like arguing with a drunk, whether tequila or vodka are better for you, they're all ready for that. And that'll energize them. That won't help them to get to, why are you a drunk? I'm saying, I know I'm being a little frank about that, but I hope among us we can do that. So, how to stop arguing and make progress with stuck people. Don't get hooked. But but notice when you do. That's part of your own personal growth. There'll be times when you do. I still do sometimes. So it's like, and I've been doing this for a long time. Treat every encounter as a personal learning experience. We are all, I hope, in a lifetime of healing ourselves and our culture. As someone said to me, when will I be healed? I have no idea. But it will say on my tombstone something like, he spent his life healing, which is not so bad. So don't get hooked. Notice when you do. That's important. You're learning about yourself and you're not being perfect. So there's good. And don't think you have to be an expert on anything to do this. This is not for experts. Many of you are, and you're a pastor, I assume, you have more experience with this than other people. I've been on panels, and I'll be one of the panelists, and I'll be probably the historian, and there'll be pastors. And it's interesting how people get up and start quoting scripture to these pastors. And I think, what an insult. You think they haven't read that? What an insult to these people. And I'll say that because I'm not the one. See, I don't have to defend myself. I'll say, it's kind of an insult, isn't it, to think these people went through seminary and everything else and never read that. Isn't that interesting? Why would you insult them like that? See, I can do that because I'm nervy and I'm off of it. If they were insulting me, it'd be a different story. Anyway, so don't think of yourself as an expert on religion. You don't have to be. Let's think about when we argue scriptures, religious traditions, doctrines, and institutional stand. And my view is I don't do it. I don't do it anymore. If you want to, I'm going to show you another book that is brand new. It came out in September. It's a bestseller and it's really good. It's by a comedian. It's called The Separation of Church and Hate. And it's by a comedian named John Fugelsang, who is a comedian, well-known comedian around national, but he's also the son of a Catholic priest and nun who left and got married. And it's really very good and entertaining about the Bible and Christianity. And so I would recommend that. Probably to me, the best book on these issues that came out last year. It came out in September. The Separation of Church and Hate. I can, again, in the discussion, I can bring it up again. So if you want to do that, if you want to argue those things, know what you're getting into. And what you're getting into is, you'll see it, is this actually energizing the person who is arguing it? And that's where we get into things. And I'll talk about it a little bit. So to counter their not taking responsibility for their views, be certain that you take responsibility for your positions. Don't blame anything else. I don't blame God for my positions. I don't blame scriptures. I don't blame traditions. I don't blame anything. The P flag principle, and this is a principle, is we are telling our story with no need to justify it because we are the experts on our own story. And I'll talk about how that works in a second. So we need to begin to make sure we're taking responsibility and not in that idea. I only believe this because God believes it. That's a good reason. I'm not arguing that. But I'm just saying we believe this. And we also believe this is what God is teaching us, or whatever it is. If you're, I'm assuming everybody here is in some way a religious or spiritual person. And this is one of my points I made already. Never call any Bible quoters literalists because they're not. Everyone, without exception, chooses what parts of their scripture to take literally and what they don't. And when you concede that someone's a literalist, this is why I will not call people literalists, you have given them the advantage in an argument, right? Because they're trying to say this is what it says, whereas you interpret it. So I never conceded. Everyone interprets, period. So here's how easy it is to get out of all this thing. We want to maintain a continuous, persistent, clear, concise, accountable, and calm response. Now, we won't do that all the time, right? Because we're learning and it's going to trigger us, or we're going to find out more about what triggered us. Well, I didn't know that triggered it. Sometimes it's like walking on a minefield. You step somewhere and bang, it goes, and you didn't even know that was there. Now you do. So we do this. And the reason for doing this is to make sure people know we really believe it. When we begin to move to the side of bigotry, I've never understood how you compromise with bigoted positions. We have told those people that something about bigotry is okay. So we need to be standing there as, let's say, an out liberal, so that that person sees that standing in front of them now is someone who really believes, and everybody around them needs to see this, someone who really believes this. I do not compromise with bigotry. I don't even know what a compromise would look like except bigotry. Then we do this by repeating it over and over again. You repeat your position at least 3 times. Though educators now saying 10, they used to say 3, as if you're jumping up and down in the same place. And we do not need to justify your response. Okay? All right, let me get this and see what. Here's how you do it. No, I don't agree. Or you say, no, I think that's wrong. Or you say, I know people interpret the scriptures that way, but I don't. No, if you're, and I give example of what I do when I speak somewhere, oftentimes in churches, because a lot of churches used to invite me as they were going through, and some still do, for when they become open and affirming, because there are always some people there who may think, well, we're not going to discriminate, but we don't want to be a gay church or something like that. And I'll give my stuff, and someone will come afterwards and say, well, what about Romans 1? Okay. Now, I know that they can figure it out if they really want to, right? So I'll say, well, I know a lot of people interpret the scripture that way, but I don't. Well, what about 1 Corinthians 7? Well, I know a lot of people interpret that way, but I don't. Well, what about Jude something or other? What about Leviticus? Well, I know a lot of people interpret it that way, but I don't. Now, you see what I'm doing? I'm totally taking responsibility for it. And I continue to use the words interpret. Or if I'm not discussing scripture, I'll say, oh, no, you understand, I'll say, that I disagree with you. So, for example, I still get when I write a column, I'll still get somehow it gets someone's looking at it who thinks I'm all wrong about these issues, and they will write me a long email, and it'll have these long scripture quotations in. I mean, they spent tons of hours on that. It really had to energize them to come back at me like that. It really was. It was part of their addiction. And my response, since I will not argue with them, is always is I want you to know I received your email. Now, notice I don't say thank you for your email because I'm really not thankful. So why would I say that? And then I'll say, please understand that I disagree with you at every point. Robert N. Minor, MA, PhD, Professor Emeritus, Religious Studies. That's it. Now, it's not that I don't know the arguments, but do I really want to make this the place I do this when I already think they have spent all this time doing this? Because I want them to know there is someone, in this case, emailing, but if it were an argument or a discussion, there's someone sitting right in front of me who says, no, I don't agree. So that's it. And that last part is, I think, is so many activists have used that response that it has helped them to move this discussion forward. Because when you open a door that's been locked or slammed shut, it may close again, but it'll never close the same. And we know that so much that goes on may not pay off immediately. So I will go, for example, to be speaking somewhere. I remember I was Fullerton, California. I don't know, University of California, Fullerton or something. And I would be speaking on gay issues, for example. And someone would come up to me afterwards and say, rock, chalk, Jayhawk, which is something we say for some reason. I don't remember. KU people say that, the University of Kansas people. And I said, oh, yeah. And he said, I came out. I'm a gay man, or I'm a lesbian, or I'm transgender, or something like that. And I'll say, I said, were you out when you were at KU? Oh, no. But I knew there was a group there that was saying I could. So I've run into a lot of people who that's their experience. So what the St. Charles Center is doing, what you're doing, you may not even know the breadth of how that's going to changing lives if you're measuring it by how many people have their butts in your pews. Right? And so this is what people want. People want to know you believe. They want to know that you really believe it. They want to know you're going to stand up for it. And you want to make sure that they don't use a religion you may love to not free themselves. We'd rather have them act like Martin Luther King Jr. than Pat Robertson or whatever. I'll tell one last story and then I quit. And then we'll have some time for discussion. I use the story a lot because sometimes I do things right. A lot of times I make mistakes. I think I told this story in Chicago, Paige. You may have heard it. When I was living in Lawrence, Kansas, we had a group together whose goal, and Lawrence, Kansas, is a pretty progressive city. It's with the University of Kansas, probably the most progressive one in Kansas, which is not saying a lot. And we were trying to get an ordinance through to have equal protections for LGBTQ people. So we started a group called Simply Equal. I didn't start it, but they asked me to come in and said, we're writing for and it took us 2 times. The first time it failed to happen to the city council, but they said, we're writing a booklet answering all the questions that the council might have. Would you write the section on religion? I don't know what I did with that booklet. It's around here somewhere. So I did. So I was sort of there in the discussion. Well, of course, there was an organized group against this. And you could probably guess the kind of churches represented. But the minister who was the always used spokesman was a black fella. And the whole rest of the group was white. So I thought, well, I'm here representing the religion on this. I'll sit down with him. I'll take him to lunch and sit down with him. And so we did. And so we were talking. And I said, Leo, oh, I shouldn't have mentioned his name. I did already. Leo, why are you the spokesperson for a group of white men who would never even invite you to lunch? See? Now, that's a naughty question. But I was tired of all this generalization stuff. He got really angry. And he said to me, you don't know what it's like to have a brother who died of AIDS. See, there's the issue, right? There's what he's dealing with. He just told me it right then. Okay. I said, Leo, I don't. But I know it would be devastating. I would feel awful. I would just not know how to respond. I would be depressed completely. So at least at that time, I didn't use it to do anything but say, I can identify with it. Just like if I were arguing with someone about immigration, I can identify with the parent who watches their high school kid thrown down onto the ground in Minneapolis. I can identify with it. It would be awful. That's telling my story, right? That's exactly where I am. Now, this turned out well because he never was a spokesperson again. He never apologized or anything, but I wasn't expecting anything like that. We basically ended the whole discussion there. Lunch was over. But so you'll never know, and we can't know what it is. It is the real issue that is being covered up by this. What the confusion is around gender that they have, what the confusion is around sexual orientation that they have, what the confusion is around classism that they have, whatever it is, and so how can we get, I'm not recommending that to be done. That's put done by an ornery Bob Miner, but that's what we're dealing with. And so I wanted him to know that I was, okay, I agreed with him and emotionally, but that didn't change my mind. So that's enough. I hope that gives you something to think about. And maybe you have something I'm really kind of done, I guess, there.
Well, thank
With
you
everything.
so much. Yeah, that was wonderful. I really appreciate it. I was taking notes while you were talking. We have about 10 minutes left for Q&A. If anyone has any questions for Dr. Miner, feel free to, we're a small enough group. Feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in, or I'll be monitoring the chat if you want to write it there and I can ask for you, but I'll give just a minute for anyone who wants to jump in.
Question. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Dr. Miner, what kind of things would you recommend to help us do the work so that we're, when we notice ourselves becoming hooked in a conversation or triggered or agitated? I feel like that's a long sort of work in progress. The healing you mentioned, what sort of things have worked for you over the years to help us sort of grow in the facility or the maturity to be able to work through those emotionally invested parts when we get into those conversations?
One thing I learned, and like I said, I've been doing this work since the 90s, 30 years now. One thing I've learned that I need is a support group that is separate from my movement. Nobody signed up to my movement to be my counselor, to be my support group. And so what I started back in the early 90s was a men's group. And we still meet. And it was to confront all the things that masculinity tries us not to, uh, men not to do. Um, and so we meet once a week, and we have a core group of men. Anybody can actually join it, but there's a core group of men we have trained that this is a place to talk about yourself and your feelings and what's going on in your week. This is not a place to talk about issues. That's that's a way not to talk, not to feel. So I find that a place I can talk about I can start, and we split it up in terms of 15-minute segments. So we time it. You have 15 minutes to talk. Nobody responds. Nobody ever repeats what you say without your permission. It's meant to protect people, right? As well as being. And so I can go in there and say, why did I respond that way? Why did that trigger me? Why did I get angry? Now you can do that with anything, whether you're dealing with a spouse or something like that, And no one's there to fix me. But then I begin to learn, why did that trigger me? Because if I have stuff with somebody else's stuff, that's my stuff. And so for me, that works. I've been through counseling, which I recommend. But you can't use the movement as the place for that. And so that has worked for me since the early 90s. And it has worked for the men who are this. We have a group of about 5 who have been consistent all that time who do that. And that's worked for me. But sometimes all you need is a listening partner. And it can't be your partner. And someone who you say, I need someone just to hear me out. Because it's surprising how we have these answers inside us once we hear ourselves say things. Once we give attention to it. I can't give attention to my feelings a lot when I'm in the work. So I have to have a place I can give attention to my feelings. And I call that I need a listening partner. And I have certain friends that I know I can say, would you just listen to me on this one? And you'd be surprised how you begin to say, I'm talking now like my dad did to me. Or I'm talking about how I was treated by such and such an adult. So it's my little child. It's going back into that. And that's the hard thing to do. And the danger with activism is it can be used as an addiction. It can be used, I talk about that in this booklet, Burnout, Blow Out, and Breaking Up. It can be used to not deal with your issues. And the corporate model of leadership is to use leadership to not deal with issues, personal issues, but to deny them. So that's kind of what I do. And so I've set that up over the years, and it's been a growing experience with me. I still need it. I'm assuming I'll need it as long as I'm above ground. And that has worked for me. But sometimes, I've spent my time in therapy. I believe in it, and you have to have a consumer experience with that. It's got to be the one that works with you. So it could be someone's pastor, whatever, or it could be 2 pastors getting together, agreeing on we're going to have this relationship, and our relationship is going to be a listening partnership. Now, let me look here. Well, I think on my page, in my front page of my website, there's a thing called the Fairness Project Online Activist Toolkit. And if you click there are some things you can download. And one of them is called Creating a One-on-One Support System Through Listening Partnerships. Download a PDF there as an example of what that would look like. So that's, if you go to the first page and scroll down, toolkit, click on it and scroll down. There's a number of things there. This is about leadership. And the ones that I need to look to make sure all those links are good. That one should be, because it's just a PDF, I think, to a document. So there's that, if that's helpful.
I think that's really
Oh.
great advice.
Thank you.
And yeah,
We all need it. We all need it.
yeah,
You know,
it's so
because
simple,
we're
but
all going to
true.
make mistakes. We are all going to make mistakes.
Yeah,
And you know how it is, how the guilt that can rise when you've made a mistake and you're afraid the whole movement depends on that, or the whole whatever institution or whatever.
yeah,
And we can't do that to ourselves. We will absolutely burn out.
yeah.
We'll fight with each other's leaders. We'll start fighting. We'll burn out. Anyway.
I'm so glad you named that, because that is a pressure that is put upon leaders by other leaders often to not make mistakes. If you say
Yeah.
then, or at least the fear grows around that. And so I really appreciate that.
So, in her book, Codependent No More, Melody Beatty says, perfectionism leads to procrastination, which leads to paralysis. That's her view. And I think that's an important thing. And again, this is a contradiction to corporate models of leadership. So if you read leadership that comes out of a corporate model, it is not about personal growth. It's about getting ahead. And so that's what I'm trying to fight, because I think that's unhealthy for human beings. It may produce better computers, but it will not produce better human beings. That's my view. Thanks, Mark. That's a good question.
That was a great question.
And I probably went on with it forever.
You're good. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I'm wondering about, because I've run into this a little bit, but I think my dear ones who are also on this call have run into it more. That last response of, well, that's not how I interpret the scripture. I'd love to hear. There's a next and a next in that of, and I'm thinking right now the Buddhist monks that are walking for peace, and I saw one of those folks that we see at Mardi Gras. We have the big sign that says "Going to Hell," and this guy is pleading for the soul of this Buddhist monk that he is absolutely certain that because of his spiritual practices are going to hell. The scripture is open to interpretation, and yet it's not. I mean, it's a both and, right?
It is. And there, if you want to go by what it meant historically, that's a different thing than how people interpret it often today. And I don't think it's because the scripture is ambiguous in itself. I think it's because people come to scriptures, whether that's the Quran or the Bible or Buddhist texts, with a prejudice. No one comes to it with an empty mind. They might come with an open mind, but it's not an empty mind. And we have all heard the popular interpretations of things. We can quote those probably, And so to me, that's part of the issue. Now, if they want to go to the next part and say, how do you interpret it? Then you have an opening because they asked. But in the kind of conversation I'm talking about, that's not going to, they're going to go on to something else. They're going to be, as at the beginning of this PowerPoint I talked about, they're going to be into another question, another answer, another talking point. You see what I'm saying? So you're absolutely right. So if someone says, well, how do you interpret that? Then I will go the next step. And does that make sense? I can overtalk that. I don't want to do that. But so
Yeah,
I think there are accurate historical possible interpretations of these things, right? Understandings, let's call them. I don't think it's but I think that in my view of scripture is it's not a monolithic thing. The Bible doesn't say anything. The Bible is a library. And people says the Bible says, I know they don't know what they're talking about. Now it's everything they've heard, right? And so I know that there are scriptures that are very meaningful to me, very meaningful to me. And I believe they're meaningful because of what they say. I believe when Jesus talks about at the end, the nations will be gathered together, and he says, what you did to the least of these, my brethren, you did to me. And I think nations means nations, countries. But I know there are people. I mean, I have an MA in biblical studies from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. I know what the right wing says. Though when I was there, it was a lot more liberal till the Evangelical Free Church kicked everybody that I liked out of the professorship because they were going liberal. But I know that they will say nations there means peoples, not nations. And I know it says nations. Gather the nations together and ask that question. So I can understand why they don't want to think of it as nations, because then you don't have to believe your own country is going to go to hell. If there's a hell, So so there's a lot of that you can get into if people want to learn. And so I will often ask, before we get into the discussion, are you willing to read something so you understand where I am? And if they say something like, this happens to be by a Jesuit priest, the book. If they say, well, was that guy gay? Then I know, see, they're looking for a way out. And I'll say, I know why you're asking that question. I did the minister, I said, I'll discuss this with you. It was a different book. It was John Boswell's Christianity, Social Tolerance, Homosexuality, because I want him to read how Christianity changed on all these issues. And he said that. I said, I know why you're saying that, because you're worried if a straight guy wrote it, it would be prejudiced against gay people, right? That's it. Which is not the worry, right? It's just the opposite. But again, this is how any ism works. Did a woman write that book on gender? Well, you see, but if a man wrote it, when I wrote the book Scared Straight, it was basically it was based on my reading of a lot of feminist literature, but it was started with men because I believe in a patriarchy. You condition men to be a certain way, and then women are conditioned to respond to men's conditioning. And in our culture, the ultimate goal is to turn men into little boys, into warriors, so they'll be willing to go off and kill other men and be killed by other men in the name of the system, and to turn women into warrior support personnel. So I wrote it from that thing, but it was basically all feminist stuff. But a white male wrote it. See? So it must be objective. You see what I'm saying? In other words, all these excuses. This is why I have this meme which says, science hasn't shown what causes heterosexuality. We don't know what causes heterosexuality. We know that it's established early, might be genetic. So if you identify as heterosexual, do not feel bad. You couldn't help it. You see what I'm saying? I'm just turning it all around.
Well, and it's like if you said before, the person might say, well, is that author gay? And my response would be, I certainly hope so, and I always presume it. Just to see what they do.
Yeah. Well, see, make this your own. But like my response is, I know when I told you, I know why you're saying that, because I want to turn it on them, and hopefully they get it. That minister got it. Now, they won't always will.
Yeah.
So anyway.
A professor of mine used to ask the question, and there's some way to say this in light of what you're helping us think about, but he would always ask the question, well, why is that important to you? Why is the answer to that question important? Now that's getting more, digging in.
Yeah.
But he always said it in a very non-confrontational way, and it was a way that it was remarkable to me at the time because it invited it invited me to think about my motivations for asking, especially the question of like, well, is that author gay or that kind of thing? It's like, well, why does that matter to me?
See, now you've done something
Some would get
great.
defensive, but others, but yeah, right.
Yeah, when you've asked that, that's a great answer, a great question to ask, because you've turned it on them. Why do you think? And therefore, they have to look at themselves and the reason why, as you said, that's a great response. Um, I think because it breaks through what is it's basically asking them without being mean, what's your issue? you know,
It does.
so I think that's a great question.
Well, and we're getting close to 1 o'clock. Dr. Miner offered to stay as long as anyone wanted to chat. So this is being recorded. So if anyone needs to jump off, completely understand. We want to respect your time. You'll get a copy of the full recording. So if you jump off and we keep going, you'll still get to see what we chat about. I had one question, Dr. Miner, if that's
Can I say before people jump off?
Yeah.
Thank you for being here and taking the time to do this. I hope it wasn't a waste of your time. I hope it gave you some ideas that would be kind of practical in your thinking. That's my goal. Nobody needs to spend more time on a Zoom meeting hearing same old things, but hopefully there is something practical, something you could think about, something you could adjust, make it your own. And that's my hope. And so it's great to see all of you in on this. Who knows, I'll see you someday in person, who knows?
Thanks, Dr. Miner. I'll say personally, it's not been a waste of time and I've taken a lot away, even though this is my second time hearing this. I find it so helpful to really dive in. For me, just background, my undergrad is in sociology. So I think it's this perfect sociological understanding and look at what is really happening under the surface of these conversations.
One more thing though, I want to say, and feel free if there's something I can do like this or something else for your organization, whoever you represent, feel free to ask. You've got my email. It's on the back of that booklet that you've got and so on. So feel free to ask. I'm cheap. I don't need to make money at this.
And I'm happy to connect anybody with Dr. Miner. After this, I'll send out an email and make sure you get his information. So I really enjoyed your description of this as like an addiction. When I first heard that when we were in Chicago, I really, really clung to that idea and just kind of chewed on that for a little bit longer. Growing up in Southern Baptist world, and then coming out and not being in that, I have learned that there are kind of these patterns of you still have these habits, that even though you may have shifted completely away from that, you're still doing the same thing. You're still copying those patterns and those habits that you did, in the same way that, like, maybe there was this fervent energy for sharing the gospel with someone. Maybe now there's this fervent energy for sharing this new perspective with someone, right? And learning how to navigate that and say, well, what do I really want to do with that energy? If I'm noticing that that's the pattern that's happening and I want to kind of get off that train, but still want to be someone who is sharing with people a different perspective. Saying all that to say, I think there are a lot of people experiencing this addiction in the world right now. We can see this growing, and we know historically when there's a pandemic, when there's economic struggles, when there's political struggles, that this is what happens. We know that intellectually, but as those of us who are people who are not trying to argue with the extremists, like you said, not trying to argue with people who have their mind made up and they're fully on the addiction train, but trying to help people who are maybe in that middle and don't see the severity of what is happening in the world. Do you have recommendation for us how we speak to them as people who are trying not to repeat just these old patterns, but still trying to reach people in that position.
I think it's good to recognize that. So now you've got number one, you recognize something you have, and you'll notice when you go into it and you say, oops, don't forget to say oops. But people tend to do that, and they don't just say oops, I got it, did it again. They say, oh no, what's wrong with me? And so on. After all the therapy I've been through, after all that, blah, blah, blah. And I still do that. See, that's unhelpful. And that's the kind of a sophisticated way of when your parents told you you shouldn't feel that way. You do. Feelings are meant to be felt. Okay, so that's the first thing I said. And I want people to get, I think guilt can be a wasted emotion. Someone can be guilty, but guilt is an emotion. And it does a lot of things. It's very debilitating. So the first thing is, oops, okay, I recognize it. You did it. Okay. Next thing. And by the way, a lot of this stuff comes out of support groups and recovery groups. These are the kind of things they'll say. Um, uh, but let's see, I kind of got off the topic again. I think we recognize where energy comes from. And when we get involved in these things, we have made a choice. The key is knowing why you're in this situation, why you're hanging into this discussion, why you're representing, why you're representing, let's say in your case, the center here and so on. And when you know that, when you're very clear about that, and it's not because you're there because you want to win an argument, right? We're not into winning arguments. We're there to represent something and to be let's call it an out liberal. I want you to know. I've been in discussions where all of a sudden it turns to something, and I had to just kind of respond on an email or something saying, realize that not everybody on this in this discussion is, let me just say Republican at this point. Kind of realize that this is broader than that, and I think we have to give ourselves the credit for just being there and for giving it a try, while we recognize when we're off base. And like I said, I've been doing this a long time, so I've probably made every mistake that can be made in the world, but then I make another one. Oh, gee, really? I did that again? And so it's a question of that, I think, as we analyze ourselves. And that's a good question to always ask, I think. We never get over our background completely, but we are in a process of healing from it, and so it will always be there in a sense, and we recognize that. Oops, there it is again. Okay, let's see. Did I stop the share? I meant to stop the share there, so it's easier to see. I don't know if that's helpful. But it's just
It's helpful. It is.
There was a book written a long time ago. It's been a long time since I've read it. Called Trauma Stewardship. I don't know if I'd recommend it now, but I think it helped me at one time. Trauma Stewardship. Let me see. An everyday guide to caring for self while caring for others. And I think, gosh, I can send you a bunch of these if you want them. No, I didn't have it. I saw that since I've written that booklet on burnout. But I think it's helpful. If you're when you're beginning to think, I think I've had too much, anyway.
That's helpful. Well, I think with that, I think we're closing out. I don't think anyone had any other questions, but Dr. Miner, I appreciate you so much. This is so, so helpful. And thank you for sharing with us today.
Well, thank you for all the work you're doing, because this isn't about some outside guy coming in and telling you what to do. You're the one